The carnival days. There were so many interesting fellas on the shows in those days, probably too numerous to mention them all, but a couple that come to mind is one fella had a sideshow with the dancing duck, and the naive people would pour in to see the dancing duck, and to a record player, sure enough, this duck was dancing its little life away, and I can assure you, you would have danced too if you were standing on a hot plate like this duck was. But someone eventually woke to the fact that this was a cruel thing, and they alerted the authorities, and they come round and rightfully arrested the guy. Another fella had some show there, I just don't remember exactly what it was, but he used to go out when one session finished, hop up on the spruiking board, and he'd yell out, "That show's over, the new exciting show is just about ready to get underway. Come in, folks, come in," because he said they're all saying the same. They are all saying the same. And they were all saying the same. What a shit-house show. Of course, Jimmy Sharman's boxing tent was another great attraction. Many a Australian boxing champion got his start by fighting in Sharman's tent. They had a big fella there called Bud the Hammer because he had great big fists, and the fella collecting tickets on the door was an ex-Chinese wrestler by the name of Rudd Key. And all the time that I knew Rudd Key, I never saw him smile, and I never saw his expression change. It was just blank the whole time. For entertainment, two of my brothers, Billy and Nolan, were about 7 and 9 respectively. The blokes used to glove them up and put them in the ring, and they would punch the tripe out of one another to the delight of the crowd. They go home bruised and bloody, but they enjoyed themselves, and the crowd enjoyed it too. But there were some weird and wonderful sideshows. Then the other outlandish one, which they got away with, the bloke that advertised his sideshow, "Come and see the horse with its a tail where its head should be." People poured in once again to see this extraordinary act, and sure enough, there was a horse that he had backed up to a food trough, and it had its tail in the food trough. And when they complained, he said, "Well, there, it's got its tail where its head should be," and they couldn't do a thing about it. And it was too late to get their money back. They weren't going to get their money back. There was one show there called The Headless Boy, and people were pouring in hand over fist to see this headless boy. And one Sunday, a reporter from The Truth saw one of the workers handing a plate of food under the back of the tent. And so the headline in The Truth the next day read, "And the headless boy ate a hearty meal of roast lamb and peas." And so that was the end of the Headless Boy show. One of the main events that was held at just about every country show that existed was wood chopping, because you would imagine back in those days there were plenty of forests and wood choppers were in high demand. This one particular wood chopper bloke, he was a big strapping Italian fella, and he decided to have a go at the knock'em game, which my brother Frank was manning at the time. Frank was only about 13 or 14. Now, the game consisted of a trestle out the front of the tent, and for a shilling, or thereabouts, you could get 3 wooden balls. Now, at the back of the tent, there were these wooden skittles set up in a pyramid style, and depending on how many you knocked down, you could win a small doll or a box of chocolates, or if you knocked them all down, you could take a selection from this glass cabinet we had there with all these trinkets in it. Now, the Italian decided he didn't want to play by the rules, and what he did was he walked inside the tent, round the back of the trestle, which means he was only about 4 or 5 feet away from the skittles, and he couldn't have missed. So my brother Frank said, "I'm sorry, sir, you can't do this. You've got to throw from outside the front of the trestle." The Italian looked at him, pushed him in the face. Brother Frank went straight through the glass case, smashed to a smithereens. Then, together with his wife and his kids, the Italian set off up the hill towards his truck. Now, some of the showies had seen this, and they went round to my dad, who was working the Cherryplane. Now, although Dad was in not the best of health, he was a big, strong fellow. He had great big hands like legs of lamb. Anyway, he fronted the Italian, and she was on for young and old. All of a sudden, my father hit this Italian with the biggest right hand we've ever seen and knocked him cold. In the meantime, the Italian's wife had grabbed his axe, and those things were as sharp as a razor blade, and held it up over my father's head and was going to hit him with it. My mother grabbed the axe off and she said, "Don't you come that, you bitch, I'll split you down the centre." So the game being over, we all wandered back down the hill, and there was only one topic of conversation around the campfire that night. Now the campfires, they were the place to be after the show had ended at the end of the day. All the showies would get there around the fire and have a cup of tea or probably a beer and talk about things, tall tales and true. And there was one particular showman there who was a ventriloquist, and he had this doll, Johnny. And me being only a little fella, to entertain the troops, he used to sit me on his knee and work me like this bloody dummy, Johnny. And I become known as Johnny. And I thought my name was Johnny when I got bigger. In fact, when I went to the Moonee Pond State School later on in life, I enrolled as Johnny Jacobson. And it was only when my brother Billy and Normie and I joined the Moonee Imperials in the Essendon District Football League, in the under-17s, you had to supply an extract of birth to say that you were under 17. So I used to celebrate my birthday on the 25th of February as Johnny. Anyway, my birth certificate come back. I opened it up and read it, and I said to Mum, "They've sent me the wrong birth certificate." And she said, "Why, son?" I said, "This is for a Ronald Jacobson, no mention of Johnny, and the birth date is the 20th of February 35, not the 25th. She said, "Oh yeah, that's you." I said, "What do you mean that's me?" And she said, "Yeah, that's you. Your name's Ron and your birthday's the 20th. And I said, "Why on earth didn't you tell me, Mum?" And she said, "Oh, I've got more to do with me time to worry about that bloody nonsense." And that was their order of preference in those days. They couldn't be bothered with those sorts of things. Another story about old Marco, the crazy snake charmer. A swaggy walked into his tent one day and he said, "I don't suppose you'd be able to give me a cup of tea, would you, mate?" And Marco said, "Yeah, sit down, fella." He said, "I'll get you a hot cup of tea." The tramp sat down on a box and Marco poured him a hot cup of tea, and he said, "Now be careful, mate," he said, "not to pour any hot tea on me snakes." And the tramp said, "What snakes?" And he said, "The snakes in the box you're sitting on." With that, the swaggy leapt up in the air, spilt the bloody hot cup of tea all over the box of snakes, and Marco after him. The bloke went for his life, and then Marco's come back and he's checking on his snakes to see if any of them had third-degree burns or not. But he was just a crazy man, just totally crazy. And Mum was telling me another story about a show he decided to have a sideshow with the wild man from Borneo. So he got a local tramp who had a great mop of hair and a big bushy beard, and he stripped him off and put a lap on him and stuck some false hair over him here and there, and then he put him down in a pit. And Mum said that by the end of the day, when people had been pelting this poor bloody swaggy with fruit and food and spitting on him, she said he really was the wild man from Borneo. Another one that they had there too was Vanessa the Ice Girl. I remember the bloke used to be spruiking outside, "Come in and see Vanessa the Ice Girl, frozen in life in a block of ice." And of course, once again, the naive people would pour in, hand over fist, and there was a girl there laying on a towel, but all she had was blocks of ice up the side of her and over the top. The ice wasn't touching her at all. And you'd never get away with that today in a million years. But that was the nature of show business. They were free and easy and tried to get a quick buck. And I must confess, as a boy, I'm not sorry that I went through it. It was a very, very interesting time.